What's up guys, it's DoubleZug. So over this weekend we had the first raid testing for Mists of Pandaria beta. It was just Mokashan vaults, but we did get some decent information out of this, and if you've been paying attention, maybe we're watching some streams, maybe you're looking at some blogs, I just want to give a little bit of information here and a little bit of some PSAs about bugs and stuff that might affect how you interpret that information. Personally didn't get to play super much on the beta, I was a little bit busy, but I did watch some streams. Footage was from Jordy's stream. I'm sure you know who Jordy is if you know my videos at all. Also, Crane streamed a 10-man POV, so if you want to look at 10-man disc, you can just check Crane out. I'll link his channel below. I'm sure there's a million people streaming healer POV, but these are two disc priests that I was watching. So first of all, I'm just going to talk about the raid composition stuff on beta and whether or not that's going to be reflected in live. I'm also going to talk about the larger bugs that affect healing, and then I'll talk about the specific stuff with individual specs that will just kind of change how you interpret these logs. First of all, with the raid composition stuff, you'll see a lot of people were hard class stacking hunters, and basically all the healer compositions were all resto shaman and disc priests. Again, this is kind of what I've been saying for a long time with healing, that for the most part you're just going to bring disc priests and resto shamans if you're really meta chasing and trying to min-max, and that was reflected in what we saw in beta. That's really not going to change. None of the bugs I'm going to talk about, none of the stuff that's different on beta with respect to private servers is going to change that. Disc and Arsham are just insanely strong. But we did see some people playing one resto druid, maybe a holy paladin, and that's totally fine as a 5th or 6th healer. You really aren't losing that much dropping one disc or one resto shaman or adding an extra healer, because again, Classic is just not tightly tuned enough pre-mythic raid difficulty that you need to bring the perfect healer comp to make the DPS check. So basically all the stuff I said about raid comp in my healing videos is 100% true, and it's also reflected in the beta data we have here. For DPS and tanks, I think, as I predicted, Prot Paladin seems like it's going to be a pretty go-to off-tank just because of that extra utility with banner damage, and also the fact that Prot Paladin is kind of weak in phase 1. So I do think that's something a little bit interesting to learn from this beta. For DPS, I think that a lot of people might have been very surprised at how much class stacking there is, and that's really just a feature of MoP, honestly. It's not going to go away. The top 0.1% guilds are going to be hard class stacking in pretty much every phase just because of how raid buffs work. You don't need to bring that many individual classes to get your raid buffs, especially with how good hunters are, and hunters bringing every single buff. So, in the first phase it might be hunters that are going to be stacked, in the next phases, it might be affliction warlock, something like that once you come online. So expect that class stacking, but one thing I'll say is that if you are a little bit more of a casual player, not, again, that top 0.1%, it's really not a big deal if you don't class stack. It's not going to feel like Dragon Soul where, maybe if you didn't have enough mages to do all your bounces with Cauterize or to soak everything on Ultraxion, you really felt hard punished. In Mists, really what you gain out of class stacking is just more throughput. Because of homogenization, every spec has a lot of utility, and even if you don't class stack and you just bring the player and not the class, you won't be missing utility, you'll just be missing some throughput. So it's actually not as big of a deal in MoP, in my opinion, to have a less meta composition. So don't be too afraid or too bummed out if you see this hunter stuff on beta and you think it's going to be vanilla, where if you're not running 25 warriors or whatever, you're just hard trolling. It's very much not like that. So that's a little yap on raid comp. Now let's go over the big healing bugs. The biggest one here I'm going to talk about, it affects every single healer, although its effect on each healer is going to vary a little bit, and this is the mana regeneration bug. So actually let's increase my UI scale here so you can actually see. So the way mana regen is calculated in Mists is you have 6k MP5 baseline, which is just 2%, and then every point of spirit gives you about 0.5 MP5 per point. However, in beta right now, it's bugged where you have, if I go to completely naked here, you'll see I have 15.1k combat regen. So we have 7k plus extra spirit regen, which is about 15,000 points of spirit, 14,000, something like that. So this means that our absolute numbers on our healing logs are going to be skewed. I think this is a Crane 10-man log. So this is going to skew the healing numbers and the healer count numbers and stuff like that. Also, if you're playing on beta, the healers are going to feel very different than they will feel in the actual phase 1. You're actually going to have to be doing a lot more mana management in the actual game than on beta. So if you've been playing beta and you've been feeling oh, this feels like retail where my mana bar just never goes below 80%, that's why it's not an intended design. Also, the way that healers work in MoP, you're not going to be getting very much spirit beyond 5-6k for a lot of the healer specs. So you will never actually get to this much regen, even in Siege, for the most part. So Really, the way that the healers play in beta right now is going to be very different to how they feel in... Also, when it comes to logs, this spirit bug is going to boost up healers that are like more mana limited than others, so healers that can kind of like have really powerful filler to spam, like maybe druid, shaman, are going to have a little bit extra gained from this, but that's like not really super significant in my opinion. Again, resto, shaman, and disc are so much better than the other healers that you're just kind of going to be stacking them no matter really what changes here. But just keep this in mind in terms of like gameplay feeling as well as the logs you're looking at and the healer counts you're going to be potentially running. This regen bug is pretty significant. The other big like general bug that's going to affect healing is the vengeance bug. So not actually really sure if this is like a bug or just implementing like a fully nerfed version of vengeance in the early part of the game, but you can see here this is a crane like 10-man log, and the tanks are doing less than the disc. So this is, some of this is going to be like player skill or whatever, but also in the boss, this is Garadriel, so maybe there's not as much vengeance like tank damage going out, but this is going to dramatically affect how much healing tanks require, because a lot of tanks have self-healing that will scale off of vengeance. So if your tanks are going to be very low vengeance compared to like private server or original MoP, you are going to require more tank healing. So again, this isn't really gonna, you're not gonna like bring a holy paladin or something to do this. You just might have to have your disc priests and resto shamans play a little bit differently to prioritize that tank healing. Maybe you take a tankier gear set on your tank or something and prioritize damage less, if this is how vengeance is in the release. However, I do think it's very likely that vengeance is changed by release to make tanks do a little bit more damage and have a little bit more attack power in this first phase of the game. So again, if you're looking at tank damage, tank healing, vengeance type stuff, I wouldn't take all the beta data like for 100% certainty. I do think this is likely to get changed. So those are the two big bugs that are going to be affecting like largely overall everybody. So now let's go into the specific healer spec bugs, and then after that I'm going to do a very quick thing on changes with respect to private server that will slightly affect the healer rankings. So the first thing here is going to be disc crit. So this is bugged where you can see if I shoot out my Divine Star, I'm getting some like 30k, 20k, and then some 40k criticals. So you can see my criticals are actually going to be healing for more than my normal crits. This is not how critical strike for Disc Priest is supposed to work in MoP. Your crits will heal for the same amount, and then 100% of your crit will be a Divine Aegis shield. So this crit bug is going to dramatically affect your Divine Aegis healing, as well as increase all of your, direct healing stuff as well. So let's just use this crane log again. If you look at here, in this low level of secondary stat in phase 1, our Divine Aegis is not going to be like this high, and it's not going to be this strong. And some of our like more spammable direct heal stuff, like Divine Star, is again not going to be as strong. So if you're looking at the like absolute healing numbers for disc, they're going to be a little bit lower in the actual game because of this crit bug. It's actually pretty significant. However, our damage is not going to be changed really at all by this bug. So your discs are still going to be absolutely cranking damage, which is like one of the biggest things we bring. So that's not going to be affected. So if you're looking at damage, that's like basically, I don't think there's any bugs with disc damage, but if you look at disc healing, again, it's going to be a little bit inflated by that crit bug compared to the other healers. So that's the main bug for Priest. It's pretty much just the mana stuff and the crit thing. The mana stuff will increase Discipline Priest damage slightly by allowing us to fill completely with Smite, but the difference is not going to be super huge. You can pretty much like full fill with Smite with like 5 or 6k Spirit, which is reachable in phase 1 anyways. So the next thing I'm going to talk about here is Shaman. So this is not a bug, this is just a difference in implementation between private servers, which is that the only thing that snapshots into Healing Rain is going to be your Unleash Life. Any kind of temporary haste effect will not snapshot into your Rain, whereas on private servers, anything like your Berserking, your Bloodlust, any haste procs would snapshot into the entire duration of a Conductivity Healing Rain, which would dramatically increase the value of these kind of haste temporary effects, as well as dramatically increasing the value of Elemental Mastery. So this change is a little bit of a nerf to Elemental Shaman, but not enough to make it not the best healer by far. And it's also a little bit of a nerf to Elemental Mastery, which is I think overall good. It makes these other two options more takeable and makes Elemental Mastery less of like the obvious choice always. So other than that, not too many differences with Resto Shaman, not too many bugs really to speak of. The one thing I'll say is that the way that the dynamic scaling on effects like Healing Rain or your totems work is a little bit wonky. It seems like there's kind of like a 4 to 5 second batching of like changes to stuff like haste. So the dynamic stuff, it's not like retail where it's like every single instance it changes automatically. There is a little bit of a wonkiness and delay there, which can feel kind of weird. But overall, not too many changes to Resto Shaman. Monk is an interesting one. So Monk has a lot of its AoE healing, especially when the raid is stacked, coming from Rushing Jade Wind, which is just your spinning crane kick, alternated by a talent. And this has a pretty significant bug that will dramatically reduce Monk's like AoE stacked healing in the beta on logs, which is that this actually has a very strange interaction with haste right now, which will be fixed in the next build of the beta. So they're aware of this, it's fixed in the next build, but for this raid testing it was not fixed, which is that if you see here, Rushing Jade Wind, it's going to tick a few times when I heal. It should tick 9 times. And this is with nothing on, but if I put my gear on, you'll see I now have about like 20% spell haste or something, yeah, 21%. Now if I press it, I'm going to only get, I think 7 ticks. Yeah, so you actually lose ticks of Spinning Crane Kick with higher haste levels. So this is a decently significant HPS loss to Mistweaver's AoE healing. So Mistweaver will be a little bit better than it looks on logs, especially in those stacked AoE healing encounters. For Resto Druid, I couldn't find any like super significant bugs that would affect their beta ranking here. Just obviously the mana thing is going to help us a lot because we have really powerful filler and rejuvenation. Although I didn't do too much testing with Druid, so there could be some unfound bugs that will affect things. But overall, I think Druid's about the same as it's going to be on launch in terms of its logs. For Holy Priest and Holy Paladin, I honestly have not done very much testing at all with Paladin or Holy Priest on beta, so I don't really know how these specs are going to be changed if you're looking through logs. And yeah, if you look through like the GitHub and stuff, there's just like not that many issues up here, so I think Paladin and Holy Priest are probably decently close. Again, the mana bug is going to affect them, but other than that, I don't think there's too many big bugs with those two specs. Although I have not personally done the testing, so I'm not 100% sure on that. So that's healer bug stuff, although as I mentioned before, these would have to be like radically huge and make it to live to at all change the rankings of Resto Shaman and Disc Priest being at the top, and that's just like not going to happen. So on live, you are definitely going to be seeing the same compositions of healers as you saw on the beta raid testing. However, again, at lower levels, it's 100% viable and totally fine to take other healers that aren't Disc and Resto Shaman. So that's raid comp stuff. Again, at the very end here, just a few things to mention that will be slightly different from private server. The most important thing is going to be that healing rain snapshotting tech stuff, which actually was kind of insane on private server. The other thing to mention here is that for Mistweaver Monk specifically, there was some stance dancing stuff you could do on private servers, at least the ones I tested on. And there's similar things you could do with Brewmaster and stuff on private servers where you could swap to your different energy DPS stance and like farm up some shuffle stacks. You could do similar things on Mistweaver where you would swap to energy stance and you would be getting your muscle memory mana procs. So every time you jab and you do a Tiger Palm, you would be getting some mana back from your muscle memory. You would get this in your DPS stance. As well as you'd have shared chi, so you could farm up chi, swap back, and uplift. So this added like a little bit of an interesting decision pattern to Mistweaver, but this just really doesn't work on beta, and I don't think it's Blizz-like that it worked on private servers. The one thing that you can do in your energy DPS stance is get Mana Tea stacks. So you'll see here as I spend chi in my energy stance, I am getting Mana Tea stacks, but I'm not getting muscle memory mana, and I'm not getting, if I swap back to my healing stance, you can see my chi goes down. So each stance has its own chi pool. So this is like probably a good change for the average Mistweaver player, but I do think that this ability to stance dance was kind of a cool aspect of the playstyle on private servers. So that's a little bit of a significant change there. And again, the changes between private server and retail would have to be incredibly significant in order to affect those top 2 spots going to Resto Shaman and Disc Priest. Just like never going to happen. So Disc and Resto Shaman are going to be top of the tier list for the whole expansion, pretty much no matter what. So that's my little beta yap. Again, if you didn't have time to play or you don't have a beta key or whatever, if you want a Disc POV, you can go watch like Jordy or Crane for 10-man. I didn't really watch any other healing POVs, but I'm sure you can go through Twitch and find, every spec out there. However, if you don't yet have a beta key or you didn't have time to play in this beta raid testing, there will definitely be a lot more raid testings before launch. So don't worry too much about that. And I will say that Mogu'shan Vaults is not like super difficult. I think it's by far the easiest raid tier. And also the healing in this phase is like pretty easy because the healers are kind of balanced around Siege of Orgrimmar. So if you aren't getting that time in on beta to practice and stuff, you're not like falling too far behind. You'll be just fine when the game releases. So yeah, thanks for watching. Again, I will be releasing full guides for all the specs before pre-patch comes out, hopefully. So if you're interested in that, like, subscribe, send a comment for the almighty algorithm. Thanks for watching. See ya.
Swobu. Zug zug.